Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Regliance 2021. My name is Maria Fernanda Valera, and today I will have the pleasure of being your host. We're very excited to have you here, and we hope you enjoy the agenda that we've prepared for you. At the end of the session, you'll be given a space for questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Today's session are questions with Hugo Cuevas-Mohr, President and CEO of the Platinum Network, an expert on cross-border payments and remittances, and Nirvana Farhadi RegTech Pioneer. Welcome, everyone. I leave you the room.
Thank you, Maria Fernanda. Thank you, Nirvana, for being here with us. Thank you for proposing this Q&A. I've been collecting some of the questions that some of the participants and some panelists have, and we are going to allow the participants to come in as speakers, so they can, open their microphones, open the video. If we have 10, 12 people, we can handle that. And I know you can handle any question that we throw at you. So you're very great. Yeah, you can. I have, yeah. Or if not, I'll cover for you. I always come in.
Okay, as long as that's the deal.
Yeah, that's the deal. That's the deal. The first question where I want to start is that after hearing your interview, one compliance person from the industry said that how comfortable, let me rephrase this. I'm trying to read it here, but how critical a compliance officer or compliance professional should be of their own software program in their institution, how they deal with the shortcomings that they see, how they document them. It feels that sometimes they're at odds, that they have a system that probably maybe is a legacy system, and how to deal with that. I mean, if some compliance professional asks you that, how do I deal with this? I see the failures. Should I document this? Should I work? How to manage that critical thinking that they have, especially because, yes, we have mentioned that most of compliance officers are liable and responsible for their system. So I guess I understood my question. What is the advice to how to manage this situation?
Right. So, Hugo, it's a very good question. And I've worked on that side myself. I've been a compliance officer, and I've had to use front-end systems that, or compliance systems rather, that have been built in-house based on legacy systems. And frankly, some of them you needed a PhD in rocket science to operate because it was so complicated. And if you pressed the wrong thing, it would break the system, and then you had to submit a ticket to IT to fix it, and it would take days on end before the issue was resolved. So, there are those challenges, certainly. And until these technologies evolve within the organization and they're updated and better systems and controls and procedures are put in place, you're absolutely right. It is the obligation of the compliance officers to certainly, take a note of that. What is the problem? What is the issue that they're facing, and escalate it as appropriate to the right individuals who need to fix that. Because it is something that, first of all, they're covering their own backs in terms of, keeping a audit trail of what needs to be happened. Because at the end of the day, if anything goes wrong, if anything breaks, or, something happens to the organization and we're looking at a review from a regulatory perspective, they want to know things that have been properly documented. There's a proper audit trail of what went wrong, what were the systems and controls, and who was responsible and accountable for it. So there certainly has to be that kind of process where there is clear accountability? How, if something's not working, has it been escalated, or are you just leaving it there? Because systems have to continuously be invested in to be improved, even if they are legacy systems, and that's management responsibility. So is it being escalated to the right person? And until we have the all-knowing, all-seeing AI compliance solution software that can fix everything for compliance officers, that compliance officer still has that human intellectual capital that they need to put into use to, see the kinks, to see what's going wrong. So that would be my advice. I hope that answers the question.
Yes. Thank you. Because yes, and my advice has always been, document it, write it on. You can always criticize things. If you feel better, it can be done in a very respectful way. You don't have to, throw anybody under the bus, but if you're responsible, just say it. I mean, the system has this and this. I don't feel comfortable with this and this, because, your management team has to know that, your IT team has to know that. And so
documents and escalate. That way, you are, because compliance carries with it a definite risk. In certain positions, you face jail time if you don't do your job properly. So, that you've got those implications as well. So cover your back. Definitely document and escalate. It has to be escalated. If you're not the person that's in charge of fixing it, you need to escalate it to the person who is, if it's not working. And if you're not heard, then the onus lies on them, for not looking at it. So that would be my advice.
Yes, great. And let me welcome Robin. Robin,
hi, Robin.
How are you?
Hi, hello. I apologize. I didn't know there was video for this one, so I already changed out of my nice conference clothes. But
that's just okay. Let me introduce Nirvana and Robin. Robin is a compliance professional. She, your title is compliance officer?
Compliance program manager, but it's kind of interchangeable with compliance officer. Been a compliance officer.
Yes. So she's been a compliance officer at a bank. Now she's a compliance officer at Rice, which is a fintech as a service company. You should look at it. And Nirvana is a very interesting.
Sure.
I know it because I knew Robin from being at the bank, which has been a MSB friendly bank, and now she's here. She's part of our Compliance Council, so she has been instrumental in helping us build the Regliance event. And she's seen your interview. So Robin, if you have your first question for Nirvana, ask it. She's ready to answer anything you throw at her.
Well, I thank you so much. I won't make them too hard questions here. But I just want to say, when I saw your interview, and it resonated with me, to be honest with you, because Hugo and I have had a lot of conversations, particularly around when you guys talking about the new breed of compliance officers. That really hit home for me. And I think that's something in the industry that we haven't quite grappled with yet. We know that we have to have more tech, not even tech friendly, just tech educated compliance officers. But I wanted to ask you, what do you think the path is to get there? Do we need to be educating compliance officers? You said you did coding. Should we have them take classes in, data structure? What are your thoughts on how a compliance officer who maybe doesn't have those skills could get those skills to meet that new requirement?
Absolutely. So everybody actually asks me this question. I get a lot of people contacting me, asking me, how do we get into your space, regulatory technology? How does that even work? And really, it depends obviously what the compliance officer's role is, but I think to a certain degree, everyone needs to now have that technical fluency and understand the technology, because more and more increase in new technical solutions, which are sophisticated technologies such as AI, machine learning. All of these things will be implemented. They're being more utilized. They're not just, limited to the world of the CIOs in the organization. The whole organization is starting to leverage them. So there has to be an understanding. There isn't as yet, and perhaps, the education gods and academia will listen to me here, a definitive course as to, compliance for RegTech or, something like that for compliance officers. So it's a bit of really at the moment mishmash of learning a bit of how the technology works. And, I think a good thing for an individual as well, not necessarily just taking a course or a certificate and having that, although there's certainly things that they can do in that space, but really, being a part of some of these industry working groups, some of these forums online that discuss these issues, following thought leaders in those spaces will really help educate them. And a lot of, my peers, certainly myself and my peers in industry, are very open to answering any questions, because one of my key missions, and I can safely say my peers as well, is to educate people, educate individuals around this area. So reaching out to them, often they're actually very easy to reach out to get some more information from. So that's one of our main advocacy angles that we have for sure. But really, so doing that, and there are certain courses obviously you can do, but really, for me, nobody sat me down and said, and when I was growing up, I wasn't dreaming I'm going to grow up to be a compliance officer LP, and and then be in RegTech, because this role didn't even exist 5 years, 6 years ago, whenever. So there's a lot of new roles that will be coming that we haven't even heard about now. And really, it's as a result of the technologies that are being developed and what have you. So it's really, what I'm trying to say is taking a look at for yourself, researching, keeping constantly abreast with what's going on in the regulatory landscape, because we're seeing a lot of regulators now are very much focusing around some of this technology. We've got the new cloud compliance regulations. We've got the Gaia X project in Europe, which is, that's another project that we're looking at in terms of cloud and, all sorts of things. There's DORA and all these things happening in Europe where, they're focusing around technology and how to harness it, and how organizations will be regulated, very much taking the GDPR kind of standard where you've got compliance by design at the development and, encouraging that at the development stage of the products. And also communicating with the IT departments and technology departments. There's always been a bridge between, a gap rather, between the business side and the technology side, where, as compliance officers, often we're just thinking about the regulations and the law, and we're being reactive really, more so than proactive in our approaches. So whatever's coming down the line, we're kind of like batting it. Okay, next, what do we need to deal with now? So really trying to be a bit more proactive, understanding the other side of the fence's challenge in terms of implementing what we need, and educating ourselves. That's the key part. When I was starting out in my career, I knew that in order for me to be more effective at my job, nobody was going to, take me by the arm and say, here you go, this is what you need to do. I had to think outside the box. I had to try and figure out what my developers and my engineers were talking about when I was trying to migrate a system. And they would send me code, colored thing. It was gobbledygook to me at first. I was like, how am I going to get my head? Then I had to understand the technical standards that were being published by the regulators that needed to be implemented. And I was like, I didn't study this, I know the law. I did not study this. So you have to. And that's when I talk about a new breed of compliance officer. It certainly is something that requires an individual to encompass both worlds, and have an understanding. Not full, we're not talking you have to become a data scientist, no, but having at least basic functional understanding of the technology will be very beneficial, and keeping your ear to the ground until, you know, these great universities like Stanford, Oxford, you know, all of these guys suddenly decide that they will come up with a good curriculum to suit these. And there are professional bodies that do have certain courses, so to look into those as well, but, you know, not necessarily so tailored and, focused.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I want to mention that in a session that I moderated here in Regliance, and I hope I'm right. Yes, Peter Singer from a company called Fireblocks. He said that one of his advices for compliance officers in companies was that they should hire an IT person for their compliance department, or at least if they don't get one person, at least half a person or half the time or something. Just work with your CEO and ask for that. Ask for a person who works with you, next to you in your compliance department, and maybe, you know, working with that person that is working under you, you're able to make that connection with IT. You make that connection of the things that you are critical, and maybe also if you are using RegTech solutions, they are the ones who can give you a best advice with relation to vendors. What do you have to say to that?
I think actually it's a very good recommendation, and I would say it should go vice versa. So IT should have somebody who has a compliance understanding as well, because a lot of the times they are like, well, why are we doing this in the first place? You know, and to be fair to a lot of people in the industry right now, you know, because of the regulatory landscape, both tech side of the business and line of business have had to kind of embrace this and understand and get up to speed. So, you know, I'm not saying nobody understands anything out there and, you know, we only people in RegTech do. No, that's not the case. We've had to evolve. So definitely, I think it's both sides, and it's very helpful and useful. And likewise, you will learn from that individual. And well, I did something very interesting, and you know, this has cropped up very a lot of times in my career, but one particular thing that I worked on, which was one of the FCA tech sprints that we convened, it comprised of 60 different ecosystem and industry participants, from academia to the buy side, to the sell side, to vendors, etc. And we had to get all these people in the room. And it was actually a very interesting challenge, because we all had to work together for the first time to create something together. We had 2 weeks to do it, and it was suddenly the first week, I think we spent a lot of time just arguing, because the legalese people were arguing with the tech side. No, you can't do that. And, you know, when we first started, it was we were just not understanding each other. We were saying the same thing, but it wasn't getting through when you dove into it. So, but after the project progressed, that harmonization kind of melded a lot more, and we became more understanding. Oh, that's what they mean, you know, and having that exposure to the other side was very beneficial. So absolutely, I think that's a very good suggestion, and I think that definitely works. Yeah.
And I'm going to ask Robin, I'm going to ask you a question. I know you were here to ask questions, but I have, but I just listening to Nirvana, something come out in my mind, because you transitioned from a bank to a fintech, and that fintech, you know, Rise, which I know through you and to Ron DiGiacomo, you introduced to me. It's a sophisticated tech company. You know, so you had to have some change in how do I say, you transition yourself mentally and from the things you know, from a very, you know, compliance oriented job in a bank to this fintech. How did that go? I mean, just share your experience with all the compliance professionals of how did it go for you? I think that will be interesting to hear.
Well, how long do we have? I already had a leg up because my career actually started at Western Union, and I spent about 4.5 years there. And then I went to a fintech. So I worked for Wise, formerly known as TransferWise, and spent 2.5 years building their North American compliance operations department. So I got indoctrinated into the fintech life. I would quite honestly say the transition from fintech to bank was the most painful.
Good. Okay.
But, quite frankly, Hugo, I had this sort of hubristic approach to it, which might not have been the right approach at the time, where when I was looking for a new job after I left TransferWise, I said, well, banking is so messed up. How can I can fix this? There's got to be a really simple answer, and they're just not getting it. And I'm going to go over there and I'm going to fix everything. And this bank is going to be amazing. And when I went over there, I said, oh no, this is much deeper than I thought. And it's not necessarily against the bank. It's a cultural divide is what it is. It's much like Nirvana, you were just saying, we were saying the same things, but we weren't using the same words. So when I went and I said, hey, what's going on with your transaction monitoring? How can I get my MSB's transactions? I'd really like to look at what they're doing. And they're like, well, we only batch those and we have a third-party processor. And so we don't actually see the batches. I said, you don't actually have the data. You don't have transaction monitoring with AI on top of it. How are you managing this volume of transactions? And it was a big culture shock. And I left the bank 2.5 years later, went back to fintech, and I said, I'm back with my people. But I think that experience really gave me an idea of why we were having such issues between money service businesses and money transmitters and fintech in general and banks. It's just a completely different language. They have the same goals in mind, different language.
I had the opposite to you. So I went from traditional financial services to the tech world, and it was an absolute shock to me because, I used to get questions when I went into the tech side, and it's like, Niv, we just want to focus on financial services. We don't want to, talk about the regulation. And I was like, excuse me, what do you mean? It's all about regulation. You can't ignore it. So I had to kind of adapt to that when I went to the tech side, and this kind of really, disruptive attitude, and we're going to do this and we're going to do this, and then ask for forgiveness later. So it's very interesting that it was like the opposite for you. So yeah, I totally get that.
Yeah,
but
I think so. Oh,
go on, please.
There's a positive side to that tech attitude that as a compliance officer, a compliant professional, I've really tried to embrace. And that is when you get in a room with people and you say, hey, the sky needs to be blue. And they'll say, doesn't need to be blue. I don't think so. Show me where it says I have to do that. And I have, it really unnerved me the first couple times it happened. And then I said, you know what? I need to be able to justify myself other than just saying it's what the regulation says. I have to be able to justify to say, this is how it affects the end user. This is why we do this. And this is why you should do it from a technical perspective. And I really try to embrace that. I do that without being asked now. I always ask myself, why am I doing something?
Yeah. Yeah, and that is the way to go, because as those two sides collide, you need to be able to do that. I've had exactly the same experience where it's just like, well, why do we need to do that? And my first response was the regulation says so, and you're next on the line as the person in charge. And then I was like, well, like you said, well, what is it and how does it affect the business more deeply? So yeah, absolutely agree with you on that.
Look, so great. I mean, I'm just fascinating listening to both of you. So, I was right in getting you two together. Really, I'm proud of myself, I have to say.
Oh, well done,
Hugo.
Thank you.
No, look, I have worked a lot in my life as a consultant, and also doing events in bringing banks and MSBs together. And Robin knows that because I have worked in de-risking. I mean, de-risking has affected the MSB world, the services we provide, even for migrant remittances, so much. I have seen companies closed because they just just couldn't get banking. They were not getting their service. They were doing the best they could with compliance, and nothing really was happening. And that has been a big issue in the international money transfer world. And even myself, and I'm going to tell the story because it's true, is the last business I had in money transfer was a company in Costa Rica. And regulation came in, and the regulator said, you have a money transfer license, but you're asking the clients whether they want to receive their local currency or dollars. You have to be a foreign exchange company. You have to apply for a license. We'll give you a year to do this. So we did. It was painful. We had to change systems, et cetera, et cetera. We got the license. It was published in the official newspaper, and just days after that, the 3 commercial banks that we were working with sent us a letter that as a foreign exchange company, they were not going to work for us. And that's a true story, and it happened to me. And my partner, I was not the managing partner. It was him. He said, "Hugo, that's it. Forget it. I just can't." We kept one bank account open because it was owned by Costa Rican authorities. It was not nationalized as it happened. It used to be the national banks. That was the only one remaining. We could still be working with that bank. So finally, I decided to, we sold our company, and this is true story. So I understand what you said from this painful side, and where I tried to bring banks and MSBs and yes, the fintech revolution has helped that. Yes, of course, it's easier now for some banks. I'm not going to say the big commercial banks. They don't want to have anything to do with the MSBs, especially if you're in cross border, which is a little bit more risky, etc. But it just and I think that RegTech is making this happen, in which they're giving both sides the security of that happens. Yes, we're monitoring that. At least KYC, everybody's looking at all the lists that are out there. We're doing our compliance. So for me, RegTech is part of this solution. Of course, there's legacy systems that have problems with connecting to some of those RegTech service, but we're there. I've seen the change happen. I think things are much better. Sometimes it's two or three steps forward and then backwards, because there's something big happens and then start to restart again. But I wanted to mention that, listening to you, because as we also make regulators and the ITs and compliance work together, we have to work also on getting MSBs and fintechs and banks to work together and at least communicate, relate. I don't know. I have not talked to you, Nirvana, about the risking, but I think you understand what I mean.
Absolutely. And you know what? I think there's so many different things that need to be taken into consideration when we're talking about this. Look, the technology is new, but we've got legacy systems still in place. We've got legacy regulation that people need to adhere to now, that was developed 20 years ago, that the technologies that are being regulated by those regulations weren't even developed yet. Right. And we also have this mentality that, we've got the fintechs, the banks and what have you, and the big techs that have stepped into financial services have all these financial products. They've got this cutting edge technology, and the regulators are trying to regulate them as they would traditional financial services products. That's not going to work. So I think that there's a whole broad spectrum of things that need to be taken into consideration by both sides, the tech and the financial services. The regs need to be updated. The tech needs to be designed in a way that takes into consideration a compliant method in the first place, because right now, having worked in tech, that, there's this gung-ho attitude that we're going to be disruptive and this is what we're going to do. Well, it's not about asking forgiveness later, because as we see, then regulations come out which are hell of a lot more onerous than they need to be, because people are scared that it's going to happen. But again, and how we're going to prevent that, and it's actually not constructive. So there's a lot of components that need to come together.
Robin, your turn.
I agree completely with everything that Nirvana said. That's one of the things I've given panel, or I've been on panels talking about de-risking and MSB banking. And that's, I mean, the regs don't work for the current situation. It's what we're dealing with right now, but the reality of us getting any kind of meaningful regulatory change at the moment, I don't really see that happening. So the challenge is to try to develop technology in a compliant way with where it needs to be, but also recognizing where it was and making sure that it's compliant with the regulations, but also compliant with where we want to go. And that's really challenging. And I see a lot of other countries, maybe Nirvana, you can speak to this, but in particular, I looked to the UK and the FCA over there, I said, oh man, that looks great. I want to be over there doing stuff, in a sandbox. What's been your experience in the UK? Are there some really cool things?
Yeah, actually, in the regulatory space, the UK regulators have certainly been the ones that have been really front running a lot of this movement across the globe and helping other regulators to kind of start their own progress as well. But they're certainly very much ahead in this space, and they're encouraging that. And because they, as regulators, have to take all this information, ingest it themselves, and figure out what they need to do with it. They need the technology to be able to provide effective services too. Australia is another place where, because of the Royal Commission's report on the banking sector, as a result of that, and it not being properly monitored and looked after, now the regulators there are really pushing for RegTech adoption, and they're also using it themselves. And it's very interesting. So I would say the UK are ahead in the US. It's getting a lot more traction now, as well as Australia, I think, is third, and then followed by APAC area and what have you. But yeah, I mean it's different. But another thing, and I don't know how appropriate this is, but I'm never appropriate. But one of my gripes, I guess, is we have a lot of individuals, and this isn't meant as a dig. This is an observation that I hope is constructive as well, especially when people are going in for new roles and what have you. I see a lot of individuals. I've been in the industry for 20 plus years, and I see a lot of individuals who didn't know how to use an Excel spreadsheet 3 years ago, suddenly the head of innovation and research, and that kind of thing happening in our industry. There has, and it's for survival, and I get that, but there has to be an element, or maybe some kind of standard that's set, that this mentality and this, it has to change, it has to shift. We can't do, just because it was done that way before, it doesn't mean the same technique or pattern or what have you is going to work. The same mentality, thought process is going to work. And really, there has to be standards that are there, but in line with the innovation that we're trying to do. Because at the end of the day, you also don't want to stifle innovation. And putting regulations and mentality that's outdated in that frontier isn't going to help. You want to be able to be creative. You want to be able to have that innovation, but in an effective, ethical, humane way. And that's kind of what I advocate. So.
Yes, I mean, yeah, and I tell you, I mean, it is so many things that are happening, just everything at the same time, and of course, I have worked in a sector of the industry which was very contained some years ago. I mean, in money transfer were remittances, were migrant remittances. That's what it was. And then other types of transfers started happening, and yes, millennials started easily moving from one country to another, and they also wanted to transfer money and do payments. So that also came across as a service. We are seeing now B2B business payments coming into the fintech space, which were just a prerogative of the banks. So it is, you know, I've seen that change happened, and our industry, which was very contained, it was little bubble, you know, just fighting over to survive there. It's all blending into other things. I mean, you have banking as a service. You have banks which work more as fintechs. You have fintechs that are really banks. It depends how you see it. You see other countries that are deciding to create these new banks, payment banks. You know, so everything, everything is blurring. You know, and I say it, and I agree. I see it from me, who's been looking at these things for some time, and I see that there's no borders. Same thing that in the cloud there's no borders. You know, jurisdictions, you know, well, you know, what do you want me to do? I mean, where is that person sending the transfer from? I mean, you have to know what is the IP, so you know where, you know, what regulation does, but that person, you know, so all those things are disappearing, and it's becoming complex. And I understand, you know, compliance professionals having to you know, like you said, Robin, question everything, you know, and that's why I'm so glad of this new and sometimes, yes, younger compliance professionals that are looking at things differently and changing things, and that's what it needs to happen, you know. So we internally even in our compliance council, you know that, Robin, we have had those discussions, you know. Well, is regulation has to be taught. You can, you know, how do you discuss compliance? Yes, we can discuss it. We can do this and that. I mean, we have had this discussion ourselves. So I don't know if, Robin, you have another, maybe the last question for Nirvana before we let her go. Anything in your mind that you want to ask her?
You know, honestly, I'd love to ask you what you think are the next big issues for compliance professionals. You mentioned that there was a renaissance going on. I love that. I love what you had to say about how, you know, the world is changing. But what do you think we're going to have to deal with over the next few years? Is there a big hurdle coming up? Is there some sort of big, you know, decision we're going to have to make?
I think there's going to be a lot of challenges coming up as we kind of start going through this period of new renaissance that I mentioned. And that is the complexity that Hugo mentioned. There's so many complex things. And by the way, Hugo, honestly, I don't think age has anything to do with it. You can be forward thinking and be 90, in my opinion, but it's the mentality. No, absolutely. It really, and I've worked with some great people who are a lot more older than I am, and, you know, so forward thinking. So absolutely, it has nothing to do with it, and you can be 20 and be absolutely ignorant. So no ageism here. There's going to be a lot of complexity, you know, especially around the regulatory environment. Now, regulators are getting and on a political level, right? On a political level, we're seeing, you know, countries they've got economic and political incentives that are coming up. Those are going to impact how regulation is rolled out, and the complexities will then roll into the organizations and what they need to do. So it all has a dominoes, I'll get my teeth in straight, effect. And it rolls out across the board, starting from the top down. And I think we're kind of challenging the old way of thinking as we go through this renaissance, and the new guards are coming in now, right? So the new guards, so that's going to take time to adapt to. A lot more complexity, a lot more regulations coming. There needs to be more collaboration industry-wide. Just don't be in silos anymore. We went after the financial services collapse of 2008. You know, we went into this silo way of working. You know, you had a person who looked at one area, reporting or AML or financial promotions, whereas before that, myself in my roles as compliance officer before the 2008 collapse, I was in charge of pretty much everything all over the board. That's why I can kind of speak to all these areas as well. And that's important because working in silos isn't always constructive, as we know. So collaboration, there's going to be a lot more complexity. Working and collaborating with the ecosystem stakeholders, I think is my main advice. And really, and I'm not just talking about industry-wide, organizationally. As a compliance officer, you need to work with your areas of business and lines of business and identify the pain points and the source. Because often when the problem arises in an organization or there's a pain point, that's actually the symptom and not the root cause of it. So really trying to understand that as well. So a lot more complexity, collaboration is key as we go through. But I honestly think from a technological perspective, we're going to leap ahead, light years ahead in the next 3 to 5 years. And it's going to be tremendous. And, the way we live our lives and do everything is completely, it already has in the last year due to COVID, accelerating it. It's going to be something amazing to behold, I think. And, let's be a part of that ride and let's be more constructive for it rather than hindering it. I hope that answers your question.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
You're so welcome.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Nirvana, for being so nice in participating in this question and an answer. I know this the industry where we are with all the blurred lines that don't exist anymore. It's interesting to hear this because yes, it's complex, but it's an amazing time to be.
It really is. Absolutely, it really is. I'm very excited about what's coming up, and it's going to be complex. There's going to be more things that happen that perhaps we don't want to happen, but I'm pretty excited to see how far we're going to get with this. So yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, I'm excited too. I'm excited. So thank you very much, Robin.
You're so welcome.
Thank you very much. Maffer, we're with you.
Well, thank you very much, Nirvana, Robin, and Hugo. And we hope you've enjoyed this session. This session is being recorded and will be available at the Peanut platform. Thank you very much.